Hey guys, welcome to Combs Design. I am so glad you're here, and I have a lot of great builds coming up in the near future. But before we get into those, I wanted to do kind of a utility shop project that will make the upcoming builds a lot easier. There are a ton of builds on YouTube of people doing these gigantic 4x8 foot workbenches that have T-track and tons of storage, and that's great. I would love to have something like that, but unfortunately I work in a single car garage and simply do not have the space. So to make the most of what I have, I'm taking an existing 2 foot by 6 foot workbench that I already own, and I'm going to add some T-track to it today. Let me show you how I did it. You'll see up to this point, I've been cleaning up the worktop with a chisel, a card scrape, and 80 grit sandpaper. This is simply to give a flat, even surface for the upcoming router operations. I started by routing out the 2 6-foot channels with my edge guide set at 5 inches. I went ahead and did both of these at once when my edge guide was set in the proper place. Be very careful when coming up to the edge of the work surface to avoid tear out. Next, I found my spacing for my 4 2-foot channels that intersect the 6-foot channels and went ahead and laid out those lines. The 2 on the far outside were pretty easy. I just used my edge guide set at 6 inches. The 2 on the inside were a little bit more tricky. I had to use a straight edge and run my router along that. After that, I finished cleaning up the top with 120 and 220 grit sandpaper. And I just want to point out it's really important to take time sanding. The more time you spend sanding on the front end, the less problems you'll have on the back end. Finally, I cleaned off the top with some mineral spirits and compressed air. I decided to go with a shellac finish for this one, and I did a top coat and sanded, a top coat with some denatured alcohol, and then sanded again. I finally did a third coat with more denatured alcohol added to the mix. This is David Picciuto's method for Make Something, and I'll link to that below. Shellac is a great finish because it dries quick and it's really efficient, especially for shop projects like this. Next, I got some steel wool equivalent pads. And if you want to buy these for yourself, they are the very fine and ultra fine pads that you can find at your local home center. Once again, take your time and really smooth out this finish. Next, you want to clean the surface really well. I cleaned mine 3 times, in fact. The last step of the finish was adding this SC Johnson paste wax. I took a little bit out, rubbed it all over the table and let it cure to a haze, and then I came and buffed it out by hand. Now we're actually going to get to installing the T-track. If you've liked what you've seen so far and you want to see my upcoming builds, please subscribe. The most efficient way to get the T-track in these intersections in that I found was to take an offcut of 3/4 inch plywood. The plywood fits perfectly in the routed channels and allows you to hammer in horizontal adjustments to the T-track as needed. Next, I marked my long pieces of T-track and went ahead and made my cuts and prepared them for installation. Hole spacing was extremely important to me and I wanted it to line up across the table. I believe these small details can take a project from good to great. I worked my way from the outside of the table to the inside, cutting equal pieces off each side of the T-track. So my first cut was 3 inches. So I cut 3 inches off the left side of the T-track, 3 inches off the right side of the T-track, and those were my end pieces, and kept working my way towards the middle. This allowed me to have perfect hole spacing that was centered along every 6-foot piece, and same for the 2-foot pieces. All the way across the board, all the holes fall in line. One of the best techniques I found for fitting a piece is to cut it slightly oversized and file it down till you get a good fit. I then took one of the clamps that actually goes in the T-track and used that as leverage. When you're hammering the T-track in, especially on these center pieces, it can be hard to hold it in place or get it to do what you want to do. This allowed me to have more control over the piece. Finally, I took that piece of 3/4 inch plywood and hammered it in. This process was kind of time consuming, but it was well worth the effort once you see the centered hole spacing and the tight fit along the whole table. Finally, I used a self-centering drill bit from Rockler to drill my holes. This was great because it allowed me perfectly centered holes with very minimal effort along the T-track. Then I came back with number 6 screws and finalized everything, drilled it in place, and that completed the table. I'm super happy with how this table came out, and I'm really excited to finally have a good place to hold down pieces when I'm working on them. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn those notifications on. I have some upcoming projects that you won't want to miss.